We want to welcome you to the first episode of the Abundant Life podcast. For those of you that don't know, my name is Brian Egerton, and this is John Ferguson, and we are both ministers at the North Lexington Church of Christ in Lexington, Kentucky. Both of us have spent some time studying in the field of counseling, and we wanted to use some of those skills and some of that knowledge from that field to deal with specific physical and mental and emotional issues that all of us deal with and struggle with in our lives, and talk about them from a psychological and a physiological perspective, but also, and more importantly, talk about them from a biblical perspective. So that's the objective of this podcast moving forward. And for episode 1, we're going to be talking about the concept of anxiety. So as we think about anxiety, we recognize that it's something that all of us deal with in our lives, and we encounter it in a number of different ways. But as we kind of get into this discussion, John, why don't you talk to us a little bit about anxiety? What is it, and what are some of the impacts that it may have on our lives?
Anxiety is both a physical and a psychological reaction, response to a perceived or threat or something that is not there. And we try to work through those things, and there's a big difference between having an anxiety and just having some anxious moment. So what we're talking about a physical and mental response to a perceived threat in life is how we adjust, or we may fail to adjust to it, and able to move on in a positive way.
Yeah, so when we think about anxiety, it can almost be referred to as worry, right? Sometimes anxiety and worry can be synonyms to each other. And all of us, depending on circumstances or things we deal with in our life, we may experience anxiety in different ways. And really, there are different levels or stages to anxiety, right? Yes. Maybe you think about a generalized anxiety, kind of the base level anxiety, where maybe we're anxious about our work, or we're anxious about finances, or we're anxious about our family, or whatever it may be. But it's normal things that we may become worried or anxious about just in everyday life. They're not things that are overwhelming to us, but they're natural things that maybe we become worried about. But anxiety can take a step where it becomes a real challenge for us, and becomes a struggle for us to deal with those problems and work through those problems. Maybe our anxiety turns into specific phobias in our life, or maybe they even get to the point where we begin to panic about them. Talk a little bit about an elevated levels of anxiety and those kind of impacts, how they affect us.
Well, phobias are fears. We have some concerns about something that may happen, and for instance, someone would say, well, I have a fear of flying. Okay, most people do. But some people, when they get on the plane, they could almost see themselves crashing. So you get to that point where you have an extreme fear, which is a great phobia, that I'm expecting something negative to happen. And then we have also the ideal of the panic, where there is such an intense rushing, elevation of heart rate and things of that nature, to the point to where you are feeling discomfort for his breathing and things of that nature, to the point to where you feel like you're going to die. We've grown from this ideal of being anxious till we got this fear, and then this fear kind of just debilitate and go into an outright panic attack, to where people that even sometimes have been said to, they felt like they were about to die.
Yeah. It's interesting because all of us deal with anxiety in different ways. All of us, John, you and I could experience the same situation.
Yes.
But we may have different feelings about that situation at hand. Maybe
Yes.
maybe for you it's something that maybe you brings a little worry to your life, but not a big deal. But maybe for me it becomes consuming, and to the point where I struggle being able to function properly because of
Okay.
it. And so all of us experience anxiety in different ways, and really depending on the situation, it can either be a simple solution, something we can manage, or it can be something that can really knock us off our feet.
Oh, yes.
Anxiety is a really it's a real issue.
Yes, it is.
And it's something that that all throughout life we're going to be dealing with it. We're going to be facing it. So as we think about anxiety today, I want us to look at this from a biblical perspective, and I want us to consider a biblical example of this idea that everyone experiences anxiety.
Yes.
And in order to do this, I want us to look at a parable that Jesus tells in Luke chapter 15. It's a parable, the parable of the prodigal son. So if you have your Bibles and you want to look there, it's going to be in Luke chapter 15, starting in verse 11, is where the parable begins. So as we get into this, I want to just take a minute and let's walk through a kind of a summary of this parable, so we can all be on the same page and understand the background. So in Luke chapter 15, this parable begins with a man who has two sons. The younger son comes to his father and he demands that he receive the inheritance that's due to him.
Okay.
So he takes his inheritance, takes this money, and he travels to a far country, and he has these grand visions of what his life is going to be. Right? He has these plans of going off on his own. But what happens is there's a famine in the land. He ends up wasting all of his money and all of his possessions, and he's left with nothing. And now he's struggling, figuring out what he needs to do with his life.
Yes.
And he'd fallen to the point where he was being paid to feed pigs, and he was longing to eat the food the pigs were eating.
Yes.
Right? He's in a bad spot here. So in this moment of great distress, he realizes that he can go to his father's house, that he's going to, even the servants there are taken care of more than he is. They have more than he does. So he goes back home, and his father sees him, and his father runs to greet him on the road and embraces him, and is so excited that his son has come back home.
Yes.
And he's so excited that he throws a party for him.
Yes.
Right? And he kills the fatted calf, and they begin celebrating because his son is finally home. But what's interesting is at this point we're introduced to the oldest son in this parable. And the oldest son had stayed with his father and had lived with his father and had served his father. And he had been out in the fields working, and he comes back in and sees a party going on and realizes that his younger brother, who was selfish and had gone and wasted everything, had come back and saw his father had killed the fatted calf. And he becomes jealous and envious because of the situation at hand. And his father has to work through these issues with him there at the end of the parable.
Yes.
So we see all of these issues playing out where each of these individuals end up experiencing anxiety in different ways. So what I want us to do is to really break down each of these three individuals, the younger son, the older son, and the father, and consider the anxiety that they dealt with, talk about the sources of their anxiety, and talk about how they were able to work through and deal with those anxieties in their life. So let's talk about the youngest son for a minute. Okay?
Yeah.
As we think about the youngest son, we think about the anxieties he faced. A lot of it stemmed from his decision to leave his father, to go off to a far country on his own, to take his inheritance, and try to make a life for himself. Right? He has these dreams of a life and a future and a job and being prosperous and kind of making a life for himself.
Okay.
But when he loses everything he has, he wastes all that he has. He finds himself in a position where he has exhausted all of his resources that he had for himself to deal with the problems at hand. And you can imagine the anxiety that must have brought to him. He thought he had everything under control. He thought he had everything he needed, and now he has nothing. And he begins to internalize his problem and think, what can I do to help myself? And then he realizes, I don't have any resources to deal with it. Maybe as we think about our lives, we can relate to that. So what kind of an effect can it have on us when we begin to internalize problems that arise in our lives, especially when we don't have the resources to deal with it on our own? How can that affect us when we realize I'm not able to do this on my own.
Yeah. First of all, when you start looking at this young man and how he ended up, as you said, in a far country, not so much, but as in terms of mileage and geography, but just everything was just far different from his family tradition, from his family culture, and things of that nature. So he found himself in a far place. I do believe that most anxiety does not come and spring forth and at a one-point stance. Some things may situationally happen, but we can see a process with him. First of all, he was anxious, and his anxiousness to want to move forward led to his thinking and the bad decision. And so those bad decisions now, at this time, through his experiences in this faraway country, now causes him to internalize how he got there. And what led to this, and his concerns, his worries, and his loneliness and all his desperation. And so now he's here. It led him to this. Now, it's one thing, Brian, for one to take something and internalize it, because it will at times allow us to see through it. But we don't want to just internalize it without trying to work through it. And so he has to have something in his mind, because what led him to this perhaps now will cause him to come back to what he left. So we have to internalize it, but for a moment, because we want to eventually work through it. We want to solve the problem, not to just simply linger on the problem. So if we're going to use the problem to give us time and space to think about it, come up with some desires and some goals and things of that nature, we ought to internalize it. But if we're just going to hold our failures and our shortcomings, that can be destructive.
Yeah, the longer we linger on those issues, the less we're going to value ourselves.
Yes.
We're going to minimize our self-worth, and we're going to lower our self-esteem, because we realize I'm not capable of doing this. And if I can't handle this on my own, I can't overcome this on my own, then what's the point? And so we begin to view ourselves as less than maybe we are.
Yes.
In those moments, I think it's important. And we see that here in the life of the younger son here, but we need to learn to have some cognitive restructuring. And simply what that means is that we intentionally adjust the lens through which we view life.
Yes.
Right? We recognize that we're facing trials, we're facing struggles, and it's bringing great anxiety in our lives. And we're having a hard time dealing with this. And so sometimes we have to intentionally force ourselves to shift the way we view and shift the way we think, so that we can see things from a different perspective, so we can find the resources we need to overcome the challenge at hand.
Yes.
This son here, it's interesting, in the parable, in Luke chapter 15 and verse 17, it says he came to himself.
Yes.
Right? He had this realization, this epiphany moment, or this light bulb moment, where he had shifted his view and realized, okay, I can't handle this on my own, but I have people in my corner that can help me through this. He knew that his father was there, and his father could help him, and his father could provide for him, and his father would welcome him back. So instead of continuing to feel pity or woe is me, I can't deal this on my own, he shifted his thinking and found the resources available to him to deal with the problem.
Yeah, you're right. I tell you what, I think I told you a few years ago, I wrote a chapter about the prodigal son, and about the one he was sick at home, and then I said he was homesick. So the idea of this, you can see that cognitive restructuring taking place right then and there, and you can see it as we read that he's looking through a different lens. He's looking at a total different perspective, to where at home he was anxious and ready to leave and felt some kind of captured, but now you find him here saying, I'm going to rise, and how much I've got there that I need to. At first he was thinking about how much I need to get from you. Now he's thinking about how much I can get from him. The point of it is that there was a total thinking realignment, as you said, there was a cognitive restructuring, and that he now has a different way of thinking. He's reconstructed his whole way of thinking.
Yeah. When we're dealing with anxiety in our lives, sometimes it requires us shifting our thinking and looking at life through a different lens. And we see, because this youngest son here in this parable was able to change his thinking, he was able to find relief from the anxiety that he was dealing with in his life. So maybe in our lives, as we think about our anxiety, maybe something that can help us is by intentionally shifting the lens we look through. So let's think about the older son for a minute. Okay, so we've considered the youngest son and the anxieties he's dealt with, and how he was able to overcome it. But let's think about the older son for a minute.
Okay.
So as we get to the end of the parable here, we are introduced to the older son, and he returns from the field, and he sees that his younger brother has shown up.
Yes.
And there's a party being thrown for him. That his father has killed the fatted calf, and the older son becomes angry. Right? He's angry because the father seems to be celebrating the younger son, even though he was selfish and he had gone off and wasted everything he had. And the older son, in his frustration, has a conversation with his father, and he talks to his father about how he doesn't feel like he's being treated fairly.
Gotcha.
Right? He said, "I've been here. I've been serving you. I haven't neglected you. I've been taking care of you. I've never left you. But your youngest son did, and now you're celebrating him, and you never even gave me a small goat to celebrate with my friends." Right? He's kind of frustrated because he feels like he's not being treated fairly in life, and so he becomes anxious and feels neglected. And in that situation, his father does something that's kind of interesting. Right? He brings him in and he kind of talks through some of the scenario with him to help shift his perspective a little bit.
Okay.
So he, at the end of that chapter there in Luke chapter 15, verse 31 and 32, he says to his son, he says, "Son, you were always with me, and all that I have is yours." And so he tried to help him realize that that maybe the issue that's at hand that he's thinking about, that it brings so much anxiety into in his life, is maybe not as big of a problem as what it originally seems, and he needs to take a step back and let's evaluate the situation at hand. He's helping him relax a little bit. And sometimes when it comes to anxiety, relaxation skills and relaxation techniques are so crucial to helping us see the problem from a proper perspective. Talk a little bit about relaxation skills and those. The benefits of those when we're dealing with anxiety.
Right, and certainly I did want to drop this in about this older son. He gets a bad rap. I think everybody has said, he's selfish and he ought to be happy for his brother. I said, but I suppose most of us, if not the majority of us, would have that probably same common reaction. You feeling like you're unappreciated, frustrated. I can see where you're coming from. But when it comes down to dealing with some relaxation, things that we can do, some coping skills to try to calm ourselves down for a moment, there are several things that we can do, and one of them is deep breathing. I mean, actually learn how to breathe from the diaphragm and everything like that. It gives us time to just pause for a moment and to be able to just concentrate on what we're doing. It gives us a separation or calming down moment, so where we won't say anything or do anything that will further exasperate the situation. And not only that, but there's something called a progressive muscle relaxation. I know that kind of strange, but it starts from the bottom of your feet all the way to the top of your head. Learning to stretch, learning to breathe, just learning to think differently. Something called mindfulness. Even that, we could do that. We could do some imagery of how you wish it could be, which is what the young son, the prodigal, the wasteful son did. He was sitting there and thinking, talking himself through it, and how he could vision in himself what he would be doing and what it would look like when he finally arrived. So we can have some good imagery. We know what we are dealing with. The ideal of it is, how do you see yourself? What does that look like when you make those changes, those emotional and physical changes? what will it look like? That's one. That's two, the imagery. And then we can sit around and we can just challenge our thoughts. Is it more according to fact, or is what we believe, is it more according to our feelings? Let's weigh those two. And then we'll find out exactly which is which, and then we can work on that. The young prodigal, he was weighing all of his thoughts, his intention on his feelings. But now, at the bottom of the rope here, it's on fact now, because he keep laying down fact. Well, how many folks in my father's house, whoop, they got this and that. They got this and that. He left on feelings, but he returned on facts.
Yeah. One of the things we see the father doing with the older son and helping him here with the anxiety he was facing is he almost uses what maybe we refer to as talk therapy.
Yes.
Right? He's talking through the scenario and the situation at hand to help the older son see the perspective, his own perspective.
Yeah.
Right? Helping him see a different perspective than what he had in mind. Here the older son is so consumed by his anger and frustration about the younger son, that his father has to help talk him through the reality that the reason we're doing this because the youngest son was lost and now he's found.
Right.
We're celebrating him because he was in a bad spot and he's back and now things are better. And so he tries to talk through the scenario with him to help him calm down a little bit and help him realize a different perspective. Oftentimes in life, when we're dealing with a problem, our immediately our gut reaction is oftentimes to blow it out of proportion.
Right.
We have this problem and it's the end of the world because maybe it's something we haven't dealt with before, or we already have so many other problems. And now this thing comes up, and man, it's so overwhelming. And sometimes it's important that we just take a step back.
Right.
And we breathe and we relax for just a minute and begin to look at it from a different perspective. The psalmist in Psalm chapter 46 and verse 10, he said, "Be still and know that I'm God." Right. In moments of great anxiety in our lives, there's great benefit of just pausing for a minute.
Yes.
Focusing on God and helping things get into perspective. Because oftentimes the problem isn't as big of a problem as we originally assume it's going to be.
Definitely.
So if we take some time, sometimes we're able to see it from a different perspective, and things start to work themselves out. So we've seen the youngest son and we've seen the oldest son. We've seen the anxieties they've dealt with in their life, and we've talked about how they're able to work through those anxieties.
Right.
But let's talk for a few minutes about the father. The father's it's really interesting. Because really there are a couple different things that he becomes really anxious about.
Okay.
The first one that I want us to think about, it really stems from the actions of the youngest son. Okay, so the youngest son, as he comes to his father and asks for his inheritance, and he goes off to a faraway land, his father is no longer able to be there with his son, to check on his son, to ensure that everything's okay with his son. And so, without our modern forms of communication, he's not able to check in on him even. So he's away, and he doesn't even know what's going on with his son. He doesn't know if he's okay. He doesn't know if he's making a living, if he's even alive. Right?
Yeah,
he's not sure what's going on with him. And so, a lot of times when we have a fear of the unknown, we begin worrying about things that we can't see, and we begin the what if game, right?
Yes.
What if this happened, or what if this happened, or what if this happened, and we assume the worst about the situation because it's an unknown to us.
Okay.
And the problem is when we become so consumed about the unknown, it begins to fog our perception of reality.
It does.
We no longer think about the things that are real, the things that are true, the things that are tangible, and we begin to be worried about the things that might happen or could have happened when maybe those didn't even happen in the first place. So here, we think about the father and the anxiety he must have been feeling whenever his son left, and we realize he was anxious because when his son comes back, he sees him, he was watching for him, and he runs to get him.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes I think we fall into this category that maybe the father was in, where we begin having maybe what we refer to as catastrophic thinking, right? Assuming the worst. Talk to us a little bit about catastrophic thinking and what that means.
Well, that's simple. You know, you think catastrophic, you just think about some catastrophe, something bad happened where people were hurt, lives lost, or whatever. And is that catastrophic thinking is simply saying that I'm always thinking the worst is going to happen. The possibility of the worst will happen, and be like any parent who cares about their children. If something that happens, or if we don't hear from them, our mind begin to run and race, and we think of a multitude of things. But the one thing be crying, Lord, hope we ain't find nothing happened to them. So we do think in that catastrophic kind of a way because we think the worst will come, and sometimes. That takes us away from that and causes us more anxiety because we can't do anything about it, even if it was. So the ideal of it is that our fear of what could happen drives us farther and farther into this catastrophic thinking. And not only does it causes us problems, but it begins to impact us physically and emotionally. So that's what catastrophic thinking is, that I'm always thinking the worst will happen. No matter what all the other scenarios could be, we'll think about the worst.
Yeah, it's a real problem that we can get into if we find ourselves going down that path of catastrophic thinking. And really, some of this goes back to when we're thinking that way. We need to have. We talked about cognitive restructuring earlier.
Yes.
We need to shift again the way we're thinking, and instead of assuming the worst and assuming all these things are happening, we need to control what we can control.
Yes.
And no longer allow the unknown to govern our lives. If we allow the unknown or the ifs in our life to govern us, then we will never remove ourselves from anxiety, but it will continue to build in our lives because we're always assuming the worst. So it's important in those moments that we learn to control what we can control. Deal with the things that are tangible here and now to help our situation, instead of letting these assumptions or these thoughts allow our reality at the moment to become worse because of it. Okay. So maybe the father here, because his son had left and he wasn't there, maybe he became anxious, had these anxious feelings, and began thinking catastrophically a little bit.
Yes.
But really, all of this kind of goes to a key idea that is really important. That maybe is one of the greatest sources of anxiety in all of our lives, and that's family. Family is a wonderful thing and a great thing. It's such a huge support system, but so often family can bring a lot of anxiety in our lives too. And we see that this concept of family systems and the role that the family plays in that. So, John, in thinking about family systems, describe what that means for us, and talk about what that means for the impact and the role that we play in the lives of one another within family.
Family system, which I've had the opportunity to teach in college in several years, is that when I'm talking with individuals, they soon realize that they impact each other. They impact the others, and they are being impacted by the others. So the family as a system, each part equals the whole, and sometimes the part impacts the whole, and sometimes the whole impacts the part. So we look at it from an ecological standpoint. In other words, is that when something happens, it impacts everything else down the road, or impacts that circle or that chain. For instance, for example, I think we were talking earlier that just say someone empties some poison or so inside of a stream, into a stream. And when they did that into the stream, well, on down further, there are fish there. Okay? So the fish in the water get contaminated by the poison. You have the fishermen or the fisher persons. They are sitting there. They are catching the fish. They are bringing the fish. They are eating the fish, could be contaminated as well. You have other animals who frequent that stream for water. So in other words, one person act on down the road with time and without some type of intervention will eventually cause impact to the whole society. It's an ecological, we are a group that's comprised of individuals, but individuals impact the group and the group impact the victim. So as the word says, no man is an island unto himself.
Yeah. It's so important that we understand that idea and that concept, because our actions don't just affect us.
True.
Right? Our actions affect everyone that we're close with.
Yeah.
Just as the actions and the attitudes and the behaviors of those that we're close with are going to affect us in one way or the other.
Yes.
And we see that played out in this parable, right? You think about the actions of the youngest son, and the attitude of the older son, and how those affected the anxiety level of the father.
Yes.
Right? Both of those brought great anxiety to the father. But you think about how the actions of the youngest son and the response from the father impacted the older son.
Yes.
Right? He became frustrated. So all of these actions are impacting and affecting one another and bringing anxiety to one another. So as we think about the family, we realize the family is such an important support system for us, and family is so crucial to our mental and emotional, spiritual well-being. But family can also be hard.
Yes.
And family can bring about conflict sometimes and challenges sometimes. And the longer we're with people, the more time we spend with people, the more opportunities we have for conflict to arise because of difference in agreements or whatever it may be. So understanding that family can bring great anxiety on us.
Yes.
What are some things, some helpful things that maybe we need to remember that can help us in dealing with conflict that may bring anxiety on us from within the family?
I think we should accept the fact that within a group with so many different people, different personality, different life goals and things of that nature, that we realize that somewhere down the line there will be differences. And sometimes those differences can lead to conflicts. And what we have to do is to be able to accept that as part of a normal family existence. So if we can realize that conflict, differences are part of everyday family interaction, and we need to learn how to sit down as they did and communicate, as you mentioned the father did, and I think the older son did, rather than holding it in, rather than locking it up. It only creates not only the anxiety there for you, but it tends to turn not only outward but inwardly to cause some other problem. But I think that what you need to do as far as that, and for it being helpful, is that when you come to realize that we need to learn how to address problems and realize that we need to come to sometimes to compromises where everyone will get what they need and deserve, not so much in what everybody wanted. Sometimes we leave the table, and most of the time we should, not always with what we wanted, but what we needed and what we deserved. And so that's what I see coming from the prodigal, the elder son, and the father. They all eventually came to the table of understanding and reasoning, and they all walked away winning. And that's the great thing about it.
Yeah, I think that's so important. When it comes to family, we realize that we're going to face difficulties and we're going to face differences and there's going to be conflict. But although those can be sources of great anxiety to us, we need to learn to deal with those in a proper way, whether it's through proper communication and by through compromise and putting others' needs before ourselves. And when we're able to sit down and work through those issues, then it helps alleviate that anxiety. But as you mentioned, if we begin to bottle that stuff up and internalize it and keep it in,
Yes.
then all it's doing is setting up for even greater problems
Yes.
moving forward. So as we think about the anxieties that the father dealt with here in this parable, a lot of it stemmed from families. And I think we can all kind of relate to that. That's a reality. It's going to happen. But we see ways that we can deal with this in a proper way, that instead of amplifying the anxiety, we can help minimize it.
Yes, I think you're right. Family dysfunction and family misfunction can really lead to a lot of issues, a lot of problems, and can cause a great deal of hurt and harm.
So as we've looked through this parable, we've seen anxiety show its face in a number of ways. We've seen in the life of the youngest son, where he became anxious because he thought that he had everything under control, and he thought he had a life set out for him, but things didn't go his way, and as a result, he began to feel like he couldn't deal with it on his own. And it wasn't until he had that cognitive restructuring and viewed life through a different lens that he was able to overcome that anxiety. We see the oldest son who felt like maybe life wasn't being fair to him. Things his father wasn't treating him fairly, and maybe he was being neglected, and he became overwhelmed by the situation, and he needed his father to talk through this with him and help him see life from a different perspective, and help ease that anxiety.
His insecurity, it seems like, you never know. I mean, he knows what is supposed to have gone. At the end of his father's death, he get the double portion. Now that the son is gone and taken his, and now he's back, how does that play? How does that play out? It's a lot of questions. A lot of questions.
Yeah. And finally, we've seen the father's anxiety when it comes to maybe this catastrophic thinking and the issues within the family. But we've seen that through communication and through controlling what he can control. He was able to alleviate some of that anxiety. You see, anxiety is a real issue.
Yes, it is.
It's something that we deal with on a regular basis, and we're going to continue to deal with it throughout our lives. Some anxiety can be good anxiety, as we've talked about, and some of it, if we allow it to get too severe, can be debilitating to us and drag us down and overwhelm us. But here's what's important. In Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 and 7, we're told that in moments of great anxiety, that we are to let our requests be made known to God, prayer and through supplication, and as a result, He'll give us peace. Right? In moments of great anxiety, there are a lot of things that we can do that can help us, whether it's through cognitive restructuring or relaxation skills or whatever it may be. But our ultimate source of peace is God. And Paul reminded us there in that passage that when we go to God and we're anxious, He can provide us the peace that surpasses all of our understanding, a peace that is beyond comprehension. So anxiety is going to happen. Anxiety is real, and it's nothing to be ashamed of, and it's nothing that we should try to hide. If you're struggling with anxiety in your life and it's overwhelming you and you're not able to function properly, we want to encourage you to seek help. To find ways to improve that so that way you can function properly in your life. We hope that through our discussion together today that you've been encouraged and that maybe you can find some help from some of the things that we've talked about. You see, the Lord, our good shepherd, his main objective for us is to provide for us life and provide it more abundantly.
That's right.
And so as we continue to go through life, let's look to the Lord, who can give us the peace that we need to help us have life and have it more abundantly. We hope that this has been a blessing to you. We hope that you'll join us next Thursday at noon as we continue with the Abundant Life podcast. Thank you for joining us.